Today's a big day, church. Man, I can't believe it. It's been one whole decade of ministry. And Southridge, I'm so blessed and excited to be a part of this special day. God has been more than faithful to our church, and today's a day of celebration. If you would have asked me 10 years ago how I was feeling when we first launched the church, I'll tell you this: I have never been more terrified of going to church than that first Sunday of starting Southridge. I had no idea what God was going to do. All I knew was that Jane was going to be there, the two children I had at the time, and a few close friends. I didn't imagine that God on that first Sunday was truly going to birth a new church in San Jose. And when those 57 people showed up, I was like, here we go. This is it. The very next week, 32 of them came back. And I was like, okay, all right, I only have to do this maybe 2 more Sundays and this church would be dead and over and I could go do something else. But God showed himself faithful as we continued to be faithful and persevere. And that has really been the theme of our church, that our church has continued to just be daring, to be bold and faith-filled.
The first Sunday was different. I had never been to a new church. It smelled like popcorn. I sat in a reclined movie seat. And the reason that I stayed, for the community, for the family that I've built here. At another church, I was a face in the crowd, and here, everybody knows me and I know everybody.
It was, I think, my second service when I got that message that got me coming back. Don't let your disappointments define you. And I was hungry to come back every Sunday, ever since then.
I think it's all the activities that we can get a chance to do to serve our community. These drag drop, the trunk or treat, the galas.
Pastor Micaiah's messages, I loved his words, and even when he was talking about like very hard topics, he somehow brought a sense of hope to each and every one.
I remember the first Sunday when we was at the hotel, I would feel overwhelming of joy and just feel like home the first time I met Southridge Church.
And we decided we were gonna have a drive-in theater style service. The police came and they shut us down. And then we stood up for ourselves, and I remember the police saying, well, these cars cannot be stagnant if they're going to be here. And so we had this great idea. The service is 15 minutes. Let's snake them to hear the service and then snake them through to the pantry to get their food blessing at the end. Just waving them through so people can hear the gospel in a very desperate time.
The time when we held a Easter event at the huge stadium, it was crazy thinking that such a small church, how do we handle such big crowds?
First Christmas tree giveaway, it was probably a year or two in, and it was just amazing being able to make such an impact on the community, and it's not something that churches normally do, and it was really amazing to be a part of that.
The Giants stadium there, the Signal 8 team, it was such a big event that we accomplished a lot with basically a small group, and that I just have a big memory, and there were a lot of people saved that day.
Pastor Micaiah actually remembered us and said, hey, good to see you again. And that actually left an impression on us to stick around.
So I decided to stay at Southridge because I was helping out with the Ridge kids a lot, and that was pretty exciting because there was a lot of events and we were always going from location to location. So it was always like you have to stay on your feet and like adapt really fast. So I found that pretty fun.
I'd heard Pastor Micaiah speak before, so I was waiting to hear a great message, and he delivered that first Sunday. After that, I told my wife, this is going to be our new home.
Memories, I mean, and it's a more recent memories, just seeing my 2 daughters on the worship team, one playing the instruments and the other singing it. What a joy it is for me to just see that with both my girls praising the Lord in the way that they do.
My all-time favorite memories are still when my kids gave their lives to Christ. I remember Megan getting baptized in a horse trough in the community center, and my husband baptizing her. And also Austin during COVID, and I remember Austin saying, I want to get baptized. And those two are still my all-time favorite memories at Southridge.
During the summer, our parents would take us because doing work, so we would just play in the rich kids' rooms. And
the one building, ACO building, because that was where we learned to ride our bike. We got to play with dolls after church. As a kid, that was just the exciting building, getting to run through and stuff.
Planting a church has its high highs and its low lows. It has its mountaintops and it has its valleys. It has its starts and its false starts. And so if you look back in the story of Southridge, it's a story we have to tell the whole thing with its high moments and low moments. And so I remember going from Oak Ridge Mall movie theater to a merger with another church. And I remember thinking that this merger is that next step that God has for us. And then 4.5 months later, when the merger fell apart, you start wondering, God, is this it? Is it over? But through that, once again, in that valley, we saw that God was still good and God was still faithful. And a small nucleus decided that God was not done with us. And so we moved to the Wyndham Garden Hotel for one service. And in the very next service, we went to a location, and it's the Southside Community Center. And we had no real equipment. We had 2 mismatched TVs. We borrowed some old microphones, speakers, and drum sets just to have church. But it was at the Southside Community Center that God began to build and grow our church. I remember seeing my daughter Megan baptized at the community center. I remember as we had several volunteers loading up into a truck on a Saturday evening to drive up to Redding to go and get Christmas trees that were stuck up there that we needed to give away the very next day for an outreach. And the men arriving just on time for the line of people as they were about to receive their Christmas trees. And then from the Southside Community Center, God opened up a door for us to move into the old Aloha skating rink, the ACO furniture store. And I remember moving in there thinking, this is exciting, we got a building, we'll be here for a while. And then one problem after another persisted at the ACO building. That roof leaked like no other building I've ever been in. And yet God was still good. Our church reached some people, we saw some people leave, and we did some amazing things. We had amazing outreaches. It was at that location that we had our largest Easter ever at the San Jose Giants Stadium, with 4,500 people showing up in attendance, and with hundreds, if not over 1,000 people giving their life to Christ, seeing people baptized. And even that chapter was closed, where we were evicted from the ACO building. And from there you think once again, okay, God, what are you doing? And then you have people in the community like Martha Brazil, the principal of Oak Grove High School, saying, I've got a facility that you can rent. And so God moved us to Oak Grove High School, where once again, our church continued to love and serve our community, leading people to find and follow Jesus. And it was there that we continued to be faithful week in and week out. And then as we were meeting there started to be rumblings of there's a virus going around, there's something happening, and the school telling us they need to shut down for a few weeks, shelter in place. And it was at that location that once again we were wondering, God, what are you up to? And then as Santa Clara County closed down for all in-person gathering, but our church still had a heart to minister and to serve others. And so Easter was coming up and we knew we had to do something. And we were thinking, what's the biggest need that the people have? And it was 2 things. It was fabric masks and toilet paper. And so our church loaded up our box truck and we reached hundreds of people at the drive-in movie theater, giving away toilet paper, essentials, fabric masks, Easter eggs, all the while preaching the gospel via the radio.
Saying traditional Easter services looked a lot different this year. KPIX5's Jackie Ward shows us how one church in San Jose took it to the big screen.
With the service up on the big screen, members of the Southridge Church stayed in their cars and listened to the radio. It actually was some sort of escape to bring them some comfort during this abnormal time.
This Easter, even though it's now 5 weeks of being sheltered in place, I believe that this Easter service is pivotal.
With a line of cars circling around and the Word of God broadcasting over the airwaves, Easter Sunday looked and sounded a little different for Southridge Church this year. Instead of filing into rows, the congregation stayed in their cars as they listened to a 15-minute ceremony.
And from there, we had our challenges. Do we defy lockdown orders? What do we do? Do we meet in person? And so from there, going to Calvary Chapel and meeting there in the evenings and continue to have church service, wondering, are we making the right decision? But all through it all, we saw God faithful. And it was during COVID, I remember baptizing my oldest son, Austin, in my backyard and seeing others baptized during that season. And it was a pleasant reminder that God has not abandoned us, that God is still proving himself faithful to each and every one of us as our church continued to dare and be bold. But it was in that season that God was leading our church to look for a permanent home. Do we buy a building? Do we lease property? Or do we buy land and build our own? And I remember meeting with our real estate agent at coffee, and I remember him showing that a listing had just come up on the market. And he said, we got to go there now. The price is good, it's close, it's in the area that we need. And I remember thinking, as I drove out to Zero Piercy Road for the first time, thinking, this is home. This is it. This is what God has for us. And I remember thinking that this would be perfect. And then when God opened up the opportunity for us to buy the land at a discounted price, and then 8 weeks later paying off the land in cash, and thinking that now we have a place where our church one day can meet permanently. And then during that season, our church moving from Calvary Chapel to the Wyndham Garden Ballroom, just seeing you guys love and serve, just being generous with your time, treasure, and talents. And then from there, I remember in the winter of 2023 of hearing of an opportunity that our church would get to possibly move into Menlo Church, South San Jose campus. And I remember thinking, God, is that gonna happen? That would be amazing. And church, look where God has brought us. I don't want us to ever forget how good God has been. I love what the Apostle Paul said, that God has been so good, and he said that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask, think, or imagine. And church, I'll say this, I couldn't have imagined all this. I couldn't imagine seeing so many of you saved and baptized, so many of you helped, so many of you serving, so many of you sacrificing. I never imagined it. You are some of my dearest friends, and it's been amazing to not only do life with you, but also to see God use you, many of you getting married, having kids. I mean, we're all starting to get a little bit older now, and it's neat to look back and see how God has been so good to us. So church, as we celebrate the past and God's faithfulness, it's now time to turn our attention towards the future and by faith declare that God will continue to be faithful as we dare greatly in this next decade. Because I believe, church, that the best is yet to come.